Welcome to the Third Degree Masonic Pod. Brother Samuel.
I'm Brother Gabriel.
And we're just a couple Masons trying to find our place in this fraternity. Craftsmen, welcome back to part 2 of this awesome interview with Brother Chad Kopenski. I'm sure you enjoyed part 1 as much as we did, and I can assure you that you are going to enjoy part 2 just as much, if not more.
So, Craftsmen, let's get right into it.
But, Craftsmen, I think it's the time and the moment that you've all been waiting for. You have been very patient with us on this journey of the question of what does it mean to be a traveling man and how can we become traveling men. And I believe that Brother Chad is the perfect man in all of his travels to help us finalize this question, brother. So what does that question mean to you? What does it mean to be a traveling man, and how did you become one?
It's interesting. Earlier today, I went back and listened to the episode where you first posed this question.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you guys knew what question you were really asking. I don't think you realized that there were about 4 specific questions you were actually asking there. Because when you started this, I guess that's my question to you all, is what did you think you were going to find? When you all, because, yeah, you had on Mark and Charlie, and yeah, you went to Gettysburg, and yeah, all of a sudden you start hanging out with like the 357 guys and the Time for Fellowship guys. What were you hoping when you started this that you were going to gain or learn?
So, one big thing that as a younger Mason, chronologically, but I mean, Sam, you and I have both been in the fraternity for almost
at least 10 years.
Yeah. So we may not be the youngest, like career-wise Masonries, but we're relatively young chronologically Masons. And something that our age group seems to struggle with is initially staying engaged with this fraternity. And I've noticed over the years, because I did a lot of traveling in DeMolay, so we got used to it fairly quickly. We kind of realized the benefits of it early, and the more and more stuff we did in this fraternity, the more it kind of, just absorbed even more. But for some of the people in our age group who haven't had that experience in DeMolay, or who haven't kind of like grown up doing something like that, it seems to be a really rough type of transition to get them over that hump where they finally then start understanding what the real benefit to absorbing the brotherhood as a whole really is. And really what I wanted is to try to learn more ways to encourage it, more ways to streamline traveling, more ways to learn how to express what traveling really means. Because as we talked about our last question, it's more so a journey of understanding the question better. It's not really that our opinion of it changes, it's understanding the concept better.
And I think for me, I was really looking for, does being a traveling man necessarily mean that you are you go from lodge to lodge to lodge, and it's, you've been to everywhere, you've been everywhere? Or can a traveling man be someone that's taking the working tools out and about into the world and coming back to the lodge with the things that he's learned? Is it necessarily specifically a Masonic term of you can only be a traveling man if you travel to other lodges? Or can a traveling man be like my friend, Brother Matt Weaver, who he's been to one lodge meeting since I've known him, but he travels all over the country working for the railroad, for the union, and he's always the first guy to buy you a beer across the street at the bar if he sees you, and he's always the first guy to come over and shake your hand and ask you how you're doing, and he's well regarded in our little tiny community. And he loves Masonry, and he talks about Masonry, and he's all excited about it, but he's so busy working that he hardly ever has time. So is he a traveling man, or is he, that was kind of the question I was going at. But
And that's why I say that I'm not. This is going to sound a little condescending, but it's not. It's just that you asked such an interesting question, and I don't know that you guys knew how interesting the question you was, how interesting that question was that you asked. Because one way to interpret that question is, what does it mean to be a good Mason? And like, what's the definition of that? And you both just kind of hit on that, right? Coming from D. Malay, you're like, well, a good Mason is the one who travels. He goes from this thing to this. He's at every single event, right? And he's the guy who gets in the car and drives 3 hours to go hither and yon. That's what it means to be a good Mason. If you were to ask, and you said generational thing, and I thought that was absolutely spot on. If you look at a lot of the Masons who came in, let's say somewhere between 2000 and 2010, probably, or before. If you ask them, what does it mean to be a good Mason? They probably would say somebody who travels and who's a good ritualist. That's what it means to be a good Mason. If you ask somebody who came in like the 70s or 80s or even before, what does it mean to be a good Mason? The ritual. They've been an officer, like that kind of thing. What we talked about is that, right, every single Mason has to kind of interpret Masonry for themselves. They have to see the lessons, they have to make it make sense to them, and they have to express it in their own lives. So, what does it mean to be a good Mason? And that's, I think, the question that you guys have had to come to, right? So, and I think you mentioned this actually in the episode, that there are guys who, go to lodge every single, they're gone 5 days a week. Are they any better or worse a Mason than some guy who's only shows up on every other Saturday for the pancake breakfast to flip eggs? As a good Mason, do they have to go to lodge?
We talked about this in our Washington and Ben Franklin episode, and we talked about it. We've touched on this before, and I think that question doesn't have a black and white answer. I don't think it does. I don't think it has a yes or no answer. I think it has a Mason.
It's a personal thing.
It is because
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If okay, you saying it doesn't have an answer, but I think I'll be honest. I'm gonna kind of press you on this. How many times a year does a guy have to go to lodge to be a good Mason? As from your responses, I'm guessing it can't be zero.
I guess not. I mean,
Right?
yeah.
Okay, I would say so this is actually I have a little bit of a tangent of my own. I would say, and this is gonna sound weird, it's you have to go to lodge in spirit at least once a Masonic year.
Really?
Like what?
Now, so
I didn't hear more
and
about
so
this.
what I mean by this is, so I am the secretary for the State Guard Association of Ohio for State Guard soldiers for their benefit and everything, and we had our scheduled board meeting for the month of February. We only have to get together once a month and everything like that, but I got called into work right before the meeting, and it was a Zoom meeting, and I pulled up the Zoom meeting, and our big diesel Vector truck is going on in the background, and I'm tying up my boots, and we've got trucks running and everything, and the guys are like, Gabe, what's going on? And I'm like, guys, we had a situation. I got called into work, and then we start joking, and it's like, oh, you just use your Mason powers and will the water to work fine again.
My God.
Because everyone that I work with knows and serve with knows that I'm a Mason, but no, and they were very understanding, and they were like, yeah, we'll just fill you in on everything, and you go do what you need to do and go from there. And I was still there. I still put my intent and time and feeling behind it. And I think that if you really value this fraternity, just putting the mental energy and your spirit behind your attachment to this fraternity is sometimes more important than just necessarily being physically present somewhere. So if you are putting any amount of effort, time, and attention to this fraternity, wherever you are physically, you are attending lodge. Now, I just went to a really good education event last night, and it was talking about how, in some people's opinion, the lodge itself is not necessarily a physical structure at all times, that sometimes it is much more than that. And I think
this presentation,
Brother King from Phoenix Lodge.
Doug King?
Yes.
Yep.
Doug King.
It was a beautiful presentation.
Oh.
And I think it does. I think my answer would have to be something along that lines of, if you are putting any sort of mental effort into the service of your lodge or into the service of the craft, you are attending lodge, whether you are physically there or not.
And I kind of look at it similar, but not so much. And speaking of it in terms of, the easiest way I can equate it to is kind of, once again, going back to martial arts. At least in Taekwondo, you have your form, your ability to do the movements and the techniques and the kicks and the stances and all of that. You have your ability to spar and to fight, using it in a practical sense. And then you have your katas or your patterns and your, the art form that's supposed to teach you the repetition and the movements repetitively, but doing it in a way that's kind of from memory. You're doing a series of choreographed movements over.
There's actually a philosophical reason for the katas that ask me about after you're done with your answer.
Will do. But so for me, every martial artist is good at one or two of those things, but they're never particularly good at all of them, right? There's always something that you're just not great at. And in my class of black belts, I was the guy that could do the movements and the kicks and all the stances, and I can fight. I can do the sparring. I know what I'm doing. But the patterns and the katas, I was terrible at. It was one of those things where it just was my weakest thing. But when you're going for your black belt, you have to, you really got to be on your A game on all three. You can't have one thing that's not good. You won't pass. You're obviously weak in an area that you haven't worked on. So for me, I had to work on those really hard, and that was the part that I really had to practice and practice and practice to get down perfectly, at least for that one day. And I had to work with the guys in my class that were really good at that, but they didn't necessarily know how to spar really well. They just didn't have that, that aggressive. Dustin.
Yeah.
Dustin Cashin. He's not aggressive, but that he still remembers all of his stuff today, and we haven't taken a class together in 10 years. But I say this because for me, masonry is kind of like that. There's, you got your practical aspects of masonry, the public service, the that kind of thing. You got your coming to lodge and seeing the degrees and watching the lectures and going through the ritual with your brothers. And then I'd argue there's this personal study where you're taking these things that we've talked about, these books that you've spoken of, and you're taking them through a Masonic lens if they don't already have one, and seeing the world through that lens of how it could be. And to me, it's, okay, well, maybe I read a lot of books, outside of my time here, and I'm at all these public functions helping you to do volunteer work, but maybe I don't come to lodge as much as I should. That's the thing that I have to work on as a Mason. So for me, that's the thing that I, my repetition that I need to work on. For me, and I just had to go through this. I'm finishing up my third pillar with the Royal Schofield Society. I am terrible traveling, absolutely terrible with traveling. So I have just put it in my calendar like, hey man, you just got to do this. So for the next 3 months, I'm going to a different lodge in a different jurisdiction every single month. Like it's just on my calendar. It's
different,
happening. So
different district. Remember that there could also be conferences. Midwest
mhm.
Conference is going to be in April. I'm speaking at that one. There's going to be, um, yeah, there's all kinds of things. So my original question was, what does it mean to be a good Mason? And then I was going with like, what's that minimum amount? What's that like? Is it 5 minutes in lodge? Is it a year? Is it 5 minutes every 5 years? Like what does that mean? And it's interesting given your backgrounds, the sort of the things that you said. And yeah, I think you've hit it on much of this. But I'm going to give a story and then I'm going to give a question. I'm going to see where this goes.
Okay.
So it's interesting that you use martial arts and you use like you didn't that kata weren't really the thing that works for you. Um, I don't know. My hope is that your instructors explained what they really were about.
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't about memorizing those moves per se. I mean, it was. But those kata came about because some grandmaster in your system, by doing those moves in that manner, gained enlightenment. That he or she learned some amazing lesson by doing those things in that manner. And the hope is that if you walk in the same steps as the master, that you'll receive the same enlightenment or receive the same lesson. Just about getting the moves correctly and specifically, it's understanding the lesson behind it. Now, um, one of the educational programs that I always threatened to write up and like make the Grand Lodge of Ohio do, but then I didn't think of a good way to do it. Um, was talking about throwing the perfect punch. Because when you are 18, and you're young and you first start doing martial arts, somebody says, "Hey, throw me a perfect punch," and you're like, "Cool," and you work really hard to throw that one straight perfect punch, right, to get all the body mechanics down. Like that's the answer to the question. As you learn more about the art and as your body changes, you realize that, oh wait, there's not just one punch, there's like seven, depending on what you're trying to set up. And it also depends on like what attack comes to you. And so if someone says, "Hey, throw me a perfect punch," you're like, um hold on, I need some more information. Then as you get really advanced in the art, and again as you get older and your body changes and you realize there's not seven punches, there's 7,000 of them, because your body is different, the terrain is different, the attack is different. Even if it comes from the same zone, it's not really the same attack. Plus, it's what are you trying to set up with that particular punch? And so there is no perfect punch. But the best thing you can do is, instead of thinking about perfect as a state, like you think of the word perfect as a verb, you are never going to give perfect ritual, but you can perfect your ritual. Meaning, no, I am never going to give my ritual, it's never going to be exactly perfect every single time. But by walking in the steps of the master, by saying these words in this manner, in this kind of setting, by understanding the lesson behind these words, and by trying to do it the best way I can given my physical and mental limitations, the hope is that I will gain my own enlightenment. And that I will also be able to create the perfect team. It's not about arriving at a state of perfection. It's about constantly being in a state of trying to perfect what you're doing. That's what katas are about. And that's what I think you guys are trying to say is that, or for these gentlemen, for you, in order for you to perfect what it means to be a Mason, you know that you need to be at lodge a certain number of, whatever. That was the story. Here's the question. You guys talked about COVID, about attending those, Zoom meetings during COVID. I ran a ridiculous number of those things. During the ground education committee had, we had our road shows, and we had a number of them where we did presentations. Those are still on Grandview, and they're kind of fun to watch. I was I was being asked to speak at the lodge, and I spoke about ritual. And I, of course, thought I knew something, and thought that I was somebody worth listening to because I don't know why. But I remember saying that I remember saying to the brethren assembled, that I knew that there were other jurisdictions that were looking to put ritual on video. I knew that they were looking to do all these things, and I knew why they were looking to do that because, and I remember like slamming my fist and saying, as God is my witness, I'm never going to allow, our ritual, like by God, ritual needs to be in person with, other humans, either person. And a brother, and I wish I could remember his name, because I will tell you that this person thoroughly messed up my brain, and he asked me a question I don't know how to answer, and maybe you guys can help me out. He said, with all due respect, right worshipful, COVID hasn't necessarily changed my existence. I work from home. I am on Zoom meetings most of my day. I order my food through, List or, Uber Eats, and, the food at Amazon comes to my door. My girlfriend comes over at night, and we watch Netflix, and, we enjoy things on Zoom, and, she leaves for work in the morning. And the nights that she doesn't come over, I go on Xbox, and I have these friends from all over the country that I speak to while we're playing Call of Duty or whatever. And so I don't necessarily, there are weeks, if not months, where I can go where I don't really ever have any human contact other than, my girlfriend when she comes over. So I don't really see the value of the in-person experience. So with all due respect, right worshipful, I recognize that you value the in-person experience, but why should my Masonic experience reflect your values?
Ooh.
I remember
that
the OLR podcast. I'm gonna let Gabe answer because I answered there my thoughts.
This still messes with my mind to this day. What do you got, Sid?
Oh boy.
That's exactly what I said because I was like, no, yeah, you can't do these on video. You can't, we can't do.
Oh boy.
Because I was initially upset when the Scottish Rite started doing Night with the Rite until I found out how popular it was, and I went, I'm just going to shut up now.
So I have mixed feelings.
Okay, please.
So that is a very interesting way to frame that question, because what he said there is basically touches on something we have been talking about all night now, is that a Mason's journey is important for the Mason individual. And it's very interesting that he raises this hypothetical question of the kind of
Not hypothetical.
Well,
That's his life.
yeah, that it's a actual practical, like almost ethical type question, basically. And on the one hand, I want to answer him with the, well, brother, all of my most powerful and impactful Masonic experiences have all been in person, sometimes traveling well outside of my jurisdiction. However, on the other hand, I do know people from across the world. Some of it because of connections through Masonry, others of it because of connections through historical research forums and other stuff. I know these people like they're my own family, and I've actually never met any of them in person. And it does raise a very interesting question. I mean, because I love technology, I love video games, I love VR, I love communicating with people in the digital forum, as long as they're not bots and as long as it's secure and everything else. I don't know. Maybe there's a happy medium of, like, maybe there's a way that the actual in-person ritual stays as it is, and then there's a condensed, almost informative version, not like a secrets revealing version, but like almost like a round table type discussion for our degree work that is
How close are you to
virtual.
the Firelands? How close are you to Valley of the Firelands?
Pretty close.
Relatively
Yeah,
close.
it's
I think we're a little closer to Valley of
Is that,
Toledo, but Firelands does a lot of virtual stuff.
yeah, Firelands, that's Ferdosi and Hessler. And I mean they were they were not controversial, but they were exciting because they would do their degrees, but they were like they'd sit around the table and they'd read it and they would discuss it. And so it wasn't the pageantry of putting it up on its feet. It was readers' theater, and it was the investment of the discussion afterwards, and that worked, really well for me. It sounds like to me like what you're saying is, if you could figure out a way to do something like that, right, where they could watch the degree, but then have like a mentor talking them through things. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Kind of, yeah, because it's really strange to me, because I remember doing Zoom meetings for lodge stuff that wasn't tiled meetings. Like, I remember we were allowed to do bills and business and
You couldn't do business, but you could do education as long as
Yeah,
but you
yeah.
had to have to be secure.
yeah,
Yeah,
it had to be secure, and it wasn't like necessarily the normal official lodge business. It was education stuff. It was like digital brotherhood type stuff. And I
So
mean,
let's back,
on the one
let's
hand,
back
it's
up here a
very
second.
useful.
Let's back up here because what you're talking about, right? So somebody watching a degree and having a mentor sit next to them and walk them through it. I've written a number of the scripts for our one-day classes over the last 15 years. Why do you think we did what we did for those?
Because
If you look at the one-day class, right?
I did that.
Somebody's walking through it, and there's somebody sitting next to them.
Yep. You have
What's
to have a
the
mentor.
difference? What's the difference whether they watch it, from 15 feet, 100 feet away in an auditorium, or they watch it on their screen? There's a difference. I know that there is, and I have an issue with it. I have yet to be able to articulate it.
So
Why
I-
should
I-
my
I think it goes.
experience reflect
Go
what
ahead.
is?
Go ahead, brother.
So and I have thought of this since you and I have last spoke about this particular instance. And while I can appreciate with this brother, and I'm happy that he's, he found a way to be a part of the fraternity, and I'm sure I'm sure he's involved in, doing things in the way that he thinks is best. But there also is a part of our fraternity that comes with tradition, and there's a part of it where there's a reason for the cable toes, right? I can't say too much out here, but at least in the first one has a very
By the
specific
way,
use.
you guys can say a lot more than you think, just so you know.
Really? You and I are going to have a talk about how much I'm allowed to talk about, because I am so afraid that the
Sure.
district's going to kick the door in and rip my Masonic dues card in half.
Yes, Charlie. Okay. You're saying this tradition, right? So
Right. So
talk me through it.
we have
How is that the answer to?
the theory is with the tradition with the cable toes. In theory, we can take you where you need to go if you don't conform to masonry, to what it is expected of you to be able to be a mason. That in itself says that, hey, there is a standard here upon which we have measured ourselves, and I don't think you can theoretically do that digitally. Now, I would argue that you could, once you are a Mason, you're here, you're involved, you've already seen and been a part of your degrees. I think there's a world out there where you can make Masonry fit with you. With, you told me about you have your guys in Wisconsin where you all get together and you don't necessarily do degree work or ritual work on Zoom, but you just have brotherhood nights and you hang out. Yeah, and that's really cool. And I mean, that's where you can get the brotherhood side of Freemasonry. But I don't necessarily think I don't think it's something that you can pay a subscription for and you can just opt in and opt out of.
Correct. And I'm gonna go a little bit further here on something I was kind of stewing on while you were giving your response, especially addressing something I said earlier. I think there is something fundamentally psychologically different about digital media versus in person. For anyone who doesn't know, there's Andre Rayu, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He is a composer and musical director. I love his music, and it is so beautiful to listen to classical pieces. There is something different. There is something inherently and objectively different. There is an objective truth to this, that there is something different between watching one of his videos and you still feel the emotion and the passion and absorbing that music. But there is a difference between that and going to the auditorium in Milan or in Vienna where he performs and listening to it there.
Well, and I to go with you on there, I kind of agree with you, because we had talked about Broadway earlier in New York. I actually am a pretty big, not a huge fan. Like that, I can't tell you the actors that are in these shows, but I know my favorites. My mom and I like to go see them. Les Mis is one of my favorite shows. I've seen it 7 times, and every time I go see it.
Cole Wilkinson? Are you like who is your Valjean?
I don't even know. I genuinely don't know any of them that are the actors. I just know that the last one I saw, I was not really thrilled with Javert, but that's fine. But every time I go, I get a different feeling from that show. Once again, just like with Masonry, I get a different message out of that show where my headspace is. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that I went and I saw the musical, the movie of it, with Hugh Jackman and whatever. While I will argue that it was an interesting, attempt at putting a musical on TV, I don't get that same vibe from those musical movies. That's why I don't go see them. It's not the same thing to me watching them do, having Wolverine singing to me, versus, this guy that I don't know. I can put my head in here and go, oh, okay, I'm in this, I'm watching this act go on. This man's putting in his whole heart, all this work. And I would argue, yeah, they probably did for the movie too, but they are two very objectively different things of going and watching the show and sitting in the pit and watching this go on with all of these people versus turning it on TV at home. I own the movie. I don't watch the movie at home, but if my mom bought tickets for Les Mis, I would go with her in a heartbeat and go see it again.
2 things. One is you guys are absolutely arguing Aristotle's Poetics, which I'm loving because, again, as a reformed theater person. Yeah, I remember doing a play where it was the Scottish play, and during one of the big sword fight scenes, somebody's sword got knocked out, and ended up hitting a person in the front row. That's the extreme. But there is an immediacy to theater. Um, there is an inherent uh, closing of distance. There is an inherent weird part of danger by being in an audience because it is an individual experience, but you are surrounded in community. One of the interesting things that happened in Western theater was that we had an audience and we turned the lights off on them. So they stopped being participators, but they started being spectators. And Aristotle talked about this because it was this idea um, you know, of catharsis, like watching somebody go through something happy or sad or awful, that I could identify with the person on stage, and that I could I could have a vulnerable moment by identifying with the person on stage, going through those awful, terrible emotions, and I could feel them, but and I could purge those feelings and have like the emotional or the adrenaline, like whatever release going through those emotions. But I was safe because one, it wasn't me, and two, I was in a community. But the only way that could happen is if I was in an uncomfortable position by being in a theater where there was that sense of, where there was the closing of distance.
Hmm.
You guys have literally just kind of said that, which makes me happy. But now here's another story. So one of the talks I do is I talk about a ritual, and this is going to go back to your comment about tradition. What's the purpose of tradition? And then we'll go back to the original question, which was, why should my Masonic experience reflect your values? Talking about tradition. Um, I talk about our ritual and thinking about it like Christmas dinner. And I use this whole tortured metaphor about my family and, but our ritual would be like Christmas dinner. Meaning, if you think about Christmas dinner, it is something where your family all comes together and you do these things at these times and only at these times, right? You bring out the china, or you have these dishes, or you tell these stories, you do these things. And you do those things because this marks that time as special. It also marks the passage of time, right? We only do these things at certain times, for certain reasons. These actions we do have a prescriptive and descriptive portion to it. It basically says, all right, as a family, these things reflect our values. They express what our values are, right? We love eating chicken a la king, and we value watching Charlie Brown, and like this reflects our values. It's also descriptive. It's also prescriptive, saying, you want to join our family, you better value these things. The story that I use is my sister bringing her then boyfriend into like to be in our family, and him actually someone sort of teaching him how to like navigate the weirdness of my family, like the weird family dynamics and the weird traditions. And because somebody told him like, this is like prescriptive and descriptive, like this is how you get through the Kopenski family Christmas, is able to join the family. And the reason why these traditions exist, and the story I tell, is this one is something called the Oplotic. Do you guys know what the Oplotic is? Any good Polacks in the room?
Mm-mm.
So,
My wife probably does.
so the Oplotic is a wafer that comes out on Christmas, and it's like a little rice wafer. And beginning of Christmas dinner, you basically like say a blessing, like you tell the story of the Oplotic, and you break off a piece, and like it goes around the table, and everyone takes a piece saying Merry Christmas, as it passes around. This only happens at Christmas. These traditions exist to both forge, celebrate, and strengthen, well, three, forge, strengthen, and celebrate traditions that transcend things like time, distance, and death. My father used to do this at our family, Christmas since I was born, and that was even when my parents got divorced and my dad would come over for Christmas with his new wife and my brother, like my dad did the applauding at the beginning of every single Christmas. The year he died in June of 2001, that Christmas, it sat on my plate. It was now my job to do that, to make sure that that carried on. During COVID, and during every year we pass around the table with my family, whatever is left over, I go and I lay the piece on my dad's grave because there's certain traditions that transcend things like time, distance, and death. During COVID, I couldn't go home for Christmas for 2 years. Think about what it would take for you to miss Christmas at your mom's house or your family's house, right? For me, in pandemic. But day after Christmas, my mom flew down to meet me, and what did she give me? The product from the table that everybody else had eaten, so that me and my family could also do that. This tradition is a way that we forge, celebrate, and strengthen those connections that transcend things like time, distance, and death. So, can you get that same thing over Zoom, over Teams, if you're not in the same room? If you call in to your family Christmas dinner, is it the same as being there? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't.
In something, I know Masonry talks a lot about metaphors and like maybe not necessarily black and white in terms of interpretation or anything, but I think as human beings, there are certain objective truths. And while, because this also kind of almost does sound counterintuitive to the point I was trying to make earlier of, if you think about Lodge, if you're actively participating in trying to improve Masonry, it doesn't matter if you're necessarily right at Lodge. However, there are certain things that I think are required because they are objectively only perceivable in a certain way.
In certain mind space.
In certain headspaces, in certain physical locations. And I'm
He's a Jesuit, by the way.
and I just have to say this has to be one of them. Maybe not necessarily. Well, the ritual question, as well as like family Christmas. There are just things that are objectively have to be in person or physically present.
Well, and I wonder this because now that you say the story, it gets me thinking. I don't really care about Christmas anymore. It's not, and I can't quite put my hand on it because every year I go, this is going to be the year that I get the Christmas spirit and I this and that, and every year it turns out the same. And now that you mention it, I have not had a Christmas that feels like Christmas since my grandmother died. But we don't celebrate Christmas like that anymore. That stopped when she left, and no one took up the tradition. So now Christmas is whatever the hell happens, and it every year I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, well, it's Christmas. So for me,
what you were talking about. Go ahead.
Yeah, it just feels like for me, like Christmas doesn't feel like Christmas unless I we're at Grandma's house in front of the tree and everyone's doing, following through,
My family, ever since my great grandparents were young 20-somethings that got married, they had this beautiful set of actual silverware, like this huge wooden box, and everything was organized and set, all the different types of dessert forks and everything. and that came out for every holiday, every big family, like important holiday gathering and everything. And then my grandparents are long since passed. Fortunately, I got to know them and have conscious memories of them, but they have been gone for some time, and that tradition left for quite some time. And in the recent years, it has resurfaced, and my mother paid to have all of the silverware uh, professionally polished, the wooden box restored, and now the family thinks about all the old recipes, all of the old stories, all of the old family gatherings, simply because of the tradition of bringing out the family silverware for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for Easter. And there's just some type of an objective universal truth to things like that you just cannot replicate with Facebook Meta AI.
Yeah.
You
Here's
just
the thing.
can't.
Here's what you guys are proving my point, and I love it. So, um, one of the biggest jokes in certain circles of masonry is that if you say the words meaningful connections 3 times, Kopenski appears. Um, did you guys see the pin that they were passing around at Grand Lodge?
I bought one.
Did you? Thank you.
I did.
Um, I still think it's funny. I really do. Mainly because David Dougherty took a picture of me with a dog. And anyway, you are all proving my original point having to do with meaningful connections, right? So it isn't just the object, it isn't just the silverware. It's the fact that, right, these traditions, they forge, they celebrate, and they remind us that there are certain things, certain connections which transcend time, distance, and death. You know, the one of the best educational programs I've ever heard, and I tell this story a lot, is my buddy Brad at Amesville Lodge got a hold of an old Eastern Star cookbook. And he, for his education program, just got up and started reading the names connected with these recipes. And some of those women had been dead 10, 15, 20 years. And all the old guys in the lodge, like, I remember her. I remember eating that. They started telling the stories. And all of a sudden, like, they're telling the family stories. And you would think to yourself, like, oh, the young people would hate that. Just think, if you could right now, if you could get your dad and your granddad together and watch them play cribbage, and you just sit there at the table and hear them swap stories, how much you would love that. And that's what the guys in the lodge did. They heard all those stories, and all of a sudden those names on the wall stopped being dead and they came to life. All of a sudden they were in on the tradition too. They had that meaningful connection to the guy on the wall and the story there. Why do guys join? They're looking for meaningful connections. Why do they stay? Because they find the connections that they're looking for that help define who they are and help them understand their world. Why do they leave? Because the lodge has taken no time to invest in those connections. Why does Christmas not mean anything to you anymore? Because for some reason your family has decided that whatever those connections were, whatever those things were that we celebrated and you know, we did here, that's gone. But here's the wonderful part. It can come back. You can forge new ones. You can, you know, you can take the old things and repolish them and put them there. But if as a lodge and if as a family, you focus on, like, I'm creating family and my family is based off of meaningful connections, amazing what you will accomplish. Now, I realize that I've talked a lot and we're probably short on time. So I want to answer the big question, unless you have things on this you want to talk about further.
I'm loving this.
Amazing.
Big question we originally started off with was, what does it mean to be a traveling man? Oh. I can tell you what it means for me, and I can tell you what I hope it kind of comes for you, because we kind of talked about it all night. My parents were big believers that when you got to heaven, God asked you two questions. How well did you use the gifts I gave you? And how much did you use them in the service of others? They were also firm believers in the campsite rule, right? You leave things better than when you found it. If you think about the lessons of our degrees, especially when you look at the working tools, you look at the working tools for the first degree, they are rough tools. They are tools about setting priorities, divesting yourselves of, divesting yourselves of things that hold you back, but also things that, you know, um, help you become who you are. And so the lesson of that degree really becomes a reminder that nobody gets the life that they wish for. They get the life that they work for. We can say, man, I wish I could lose 200 pounds. But at some point, our values have to match our actions. Actions. Because nobody gets the life they wish for. They get the life that they work for. You reflect and you make those choices. If you look at our second degree, those are precision tools that teach us how to govern our conduct with, within, also with the world around. And what that reminds us, if you think about the lesson of that degree, is that our thoughts, words, and deeds matter. They can affect the world around us. They can affect ourselves and the world around us. So we better be pretty careful with our thoughts, words, and deeds. We better use education and industry and wisdom to temper our power because our thoughts, words, and deeds have action and can affect our world and our lives and around us. We matter. We have agency. And then if you look at the third degree, look at the working tools there. What it lets you know is that our if the goal is to create the perfect ashlar of our life, awesome. But a perfect ashlar by itself is just a pretty rock. It's when you take the ashlar of your life and you combine it with the ashlar of somebody else's and somebody else's and somebody else's. You can build something that is more beautiful than the sum of its parts. You can build something that is long lasting, that does transcend through the ages. And so if you take our degrees as a whole, what it basically tells you is that you have a duty to develop your gifts to the best of your ability and then use them in the service of others. That's what God asks of you. And that really sort of our measure should be leave this place as good as, if not better than when you found it. And so, since every single one of us has to try to figure out what masonry is, right? We're presented with this thing, and we have to interpret it. We have to internalize it. We have to figure out our place in the world, how the world works. We have to figure that all out for ourselves, and then we have to express it in our own lives. There is absolutely no reason in the world why my Masonic experience and my masonry has to look exactly like yours, other than we're all trying to go towards the same place, which is to make ourselves and our world a better place. To me, that's what a traveling man is doing. Every day getting up and going, okay, I have these tools in my pocket. I have these skills that I have. By itself, it is neither good nor evil. What am I going to choose to do with this? Am I going to hurt? Am I going to help? Am I going to cut? What choices am I going to make to develop my skills to the best of my ability, then use them in the service of others? Knowing that there are others on the same path who I can go to and help, support for when I fall, when I need advice, that together we'll build something transcends ages, and that together we are traveling together. Is that a little bit too flowery?
No, that's
No, That's
As I think there's a very you that was one of the most eloquent ways of explaining, I think, what I value as a man and as a Mason that I've ever heard. However, it ties into one of my favorite paraphrasings of a old Greek, ancient Greek proverb. Societies grow great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. And
Yeah, Bill and I talked about that one a long time.
and I
So,
think
the other,
and that's something that traveling helps you do.
yeah.
and it makes sense to you. It helps you understand your world and your place in it. It helps you forge those connections to your world, to the people around you. It helps you. It helps you connect, which is all we're trying to do. And if you can't because you're too busy, because you have to get the kids to bed, or you have to help them with their homework, or you're studying for, your CT exam, or your whatever, that's okay, because masonry is going to, we're going to change. Who you were at 17 and who you are at 54 are two very different people, which means that your masonry is going to be different, and it should be, because you're never going to get it perfect. You're just trying to perfect yourself, perfect your world. So
I
There's the
I
tagline for the episode. There's the tagline
I-
for the episode.
I don't think, honestly, I think that answered it. I mean,
It did.
it's
Congratulations,
Want to see my notes? I made a bowl of them.
we've solved all of
Why
masonry's
does Earl write
problems.
it up a cheesehead?
Oh, because he's the big cheese of the district now.
Yep.
He's the district president, so he's the big cheese.
Yes. Yes.
Who gave him a cheesehead?
Dan Slavin did.
I didn't.
Dan Slavin. The Dan Slavin.
The
Disrespectful.
Dan Slavin.
But no, sorry, I'm just still processing what
Yeah,
you
that
said.
that was heavy.
Here's the
That was
thing.
very heavy.
Tell me your reactions and your thoughts. Tell me what you're feeling.
No.
I started
What
tearing
you're-
up a
what
little
you're-
bit when you talked about reading the old Eastern Stars cookbooks and reading the names, and then the old Masons rekindling and reforging connections that had been long past in their lives. It brought some big emotions to me.
And for me, we always talk about that perfect Ashler, right? And we even fall down the rabbit hole of, yeah, we're working towards being perfect Ashlers. We're still rough Ashlers. But when you're like, it's just a stone. It's just a pretty stone. It on its own doesn't mean anything. But when you take that and you put it with something else,
When you understand the symbolism and the allegory and the deeper meaning behind it, the deeper actual application to yourself as a man and a Mason, not just the rock itself.
well, and not just because while you were talking, and yeah, there's a literal interpretation to what you're saying, right? But there's also a very symbolic and spiritual interpretation to what you said, and everything that you just said has a Masonic connotation symbolically that in my brain is going, okay, yes, you take the perfect Ashley, you put it together, you have a high-functioning lodge. But then there's also the idea of being a part of something bigger than yourself and making something bigger than yourself, but you can only be the stone, one of the stones. It takes all of the stones to make something like that work. But then you can also take into our speculative masonry of what are we supposed to do as speculative masons? We are supposed to build that great edifice in our minds and in our spirits. Like I said, as you're talking, my brain's taking everything and going in 4 different directions.
Are you sure you're not an esoteric Mason? You
listen,
sound like an esoteric Mason right now.
It's really funny you say that, because every time I talk, all my friends who are esoteric, Bill Carter will tell you, he's an esoteric Mason. I'm like, no. Taylor Klein will say the same thing. there's a I've told the story way too often, but there's an author named Aldo Leopold, and he wrote this piece that I just absolutely love called "Think Like a Mountain." And the big takeaway basically is that there's a time before you and there's a time after you, but this is the time of you, and that you owe a duty to what came before, and you owe a duty to what came back or comes after you, and so it's not about you, but it's up to you. So you think like a mountain. It's not what you do today has effects that come after. And so it's not about you, but it's up to you. It's your perfect ashlar of a stone is great, but you have a duty to the other stones around you and what
Right.
you're trying to build.
Right.
So
And you can't fit two stones together unless they're perfectly put together, but you both have to be perfect to be able to get there. Like I said, I'm gonna be I'm so excited that I get to listen to this episode all over again in editing because my brain is just gonna unpack it in a completely different way. And
I love the idea
Well,
of
yeah.
owing the duty to what came before and owing a duty to what comes after. I think that's so beautiful. That's eloquent. That's amazing. I wish more people internalized that and had that in the front of their actions and thoughts right now.
I would encourage you to read a book called Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold, not a Mason. He was the guy who really started looking at nature in terms of um, an ethical treatment of nature. That man is not the lord of nature, but man has a place in nature. And there's two essays in there that I absolutely love. And one is Think Like a Mountain that I talked about. And um, that was my takeaway from the piece, but that's not what Aldo Leopold expressly says. The other one that I love that he talks about is it's called the Great Oak or Giant Oak. There's a huge oak that gets struck by lightning outside of his house, and he and his son go out there with a big crosscut saw and are sawing through this oak, and he's like, "Oh look, through this ring we've hit 1920, and this is what happened." And then he's like, "Oh look, now here we are at 1890 and 1880 and 1870," and just talking about how here's this mighty oak that has fallen, and he's cutting through history, and that this piece of history is now going to warm his home. And then those ashes are going to go feed his strawberries later. And so that, again, connections that transcend time, distance, and death. Yeah, it's wonderful that this oak was there and there's all this history, and he owes a duty of respect to that oak. But that history also serves him now and serves the future. And understanding how that all fits is
Mind blowing.
it's thank you, but I'm not going to claim any credit. So it's Aldo Leopold. So, but thank you.
Chad Kopenski, the greatest esoteric Mason in the United States.
Yeah. Vote
He's
you.
not. I will tell you.
Never.
I take a lot of talk of shit, but it's okay. Yeah, ask Bill. Bill will tell you. He said, yeah.
So
That's
just
what episodes of Bill, by the way. Those have been fun to listen to.
I could just sit here and listen to him talk for hours. I feel like I'm in a trance. Have you ever you've seen the original Jungle Book movie? Like the cartoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, the snake with the hypnotizing eyes and everything. Whenever he talks, I'm just over here like staring. I'm like instead of going to sleep, it's be better. Do better.
AOL podcast and see what happens. 3 hours later,
Yeah, right?
and we're both like, oh, I love him very much, and I the times that we get to actually sit and talk are few and far between. Usually, it's fleeting here, a quick message there, but every time I do, I leave feeling smarter. And
I'm
he
always
usually jokes that
happy.
I'm only a person.
I'm just happy when he
we're not
shows
talking,
up.
so.
Yeah, I'm just happy he takes time out of his. I know he's almost as busy now as he was when he was Grandmaster doing stuff. But
Mhm.
the fact that he took time out of his schedule to sit down and talk about something he's passionate about with us, and the same for yourself. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I knew exactly when I came up with this question. I knew exactly who I wanted to be our keynote. I only have one last question for you.
Okay.
Do you have any final words of advice or remarks to the craftsmen that listen to this show?
I've been talking for 2.5 hours. Nobody cares what I have to say. Um,
Don't worry, they get the recap with us later.
oh, God bless. I and now I'm trying to encapsulate like the whole last 2.5 hours, including the 3 hours you missed by not hitting record.
Right.
Um, it's not even advice. I think it's just, if masonry is this lens that we're supposed to use to kind of, look at our world and try to, figure out the way the world works and our place in it. I would encourage brethren to do one thing and then to get kind of comfortable with another. The one thing I encourage them to do is start thinking about everything in terms of meaningful connections. Because those connections, again, they define us, they sustain us, they are everything. If you focus on the connections, it may not solve all the problems, but it will at least, bring up different problems and different questions and possibly different solutions. And the other thing that I would encourage brethren to do, to get to a place, and it's difficult to do, is to love uncertainty. When I was 18, I thought I knew everything, and I thought I knew exactly the way that the world worked. And then I met a girl, and then I moved to Ohio, and then I had a kid, and then I changed like all these things. And so I think I know the way the world works today. I think I know how I fit into this world today. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Learn to love uncertainty and be comfortable in that.
I love it. Well, sir, we just want to say thank you for taking time out of your day and helping us with this and helping the craftsman to answer this question.
Oh, Toya, huge fan, huge fan. So thank you for letting me be on. I totally appreciate it. So nice of you.
Thank you, Brother Chad.
Welcome back, craftsman, from that awesome interview with Brother Chad.
I'll tell you what, that was a phenomenal interview.
I didn't know what to expect next. And I knew that going forward. I've had lots of talks with Chad, and every time I walk away from them, I always end up with, I don't want to say a different perspective than I had before, because that's not quite right. I just don't know what, it's like reaching into your Happy Meal expecting to get a cheeseburger and finding chicken McNuggets, and you're more happy that you have the chicken McNuggets because you were expecting the burger. Mom made you get the burger, but you really wanted the chicken McNuggets. That's kind of how I feel about
It was we talked about so many things that kind of all tied together, and it was sometimes interesting to see where it was going and where it would all tie together, but it was really good.
I mean, I just, one, not really understanding and thinking about, him asking us these questions that lead into his answer was phenomenal. But what got me and what really kind of got my gears going was the idea of this, your personal experience in masonry, my personal experience in masonry, do your values get to judge my values? Where do we draw this line with tradition, creating traditions? Can you have a mason who's never walked in a lodge room be a mason? These kinds of arguments, and then kind of framing it in this idea of being a traveling man is being a servant to your brothers around you and to your community, and working on yourself in the best way possible. It's a mindset. It's not a title that is just acquired. It's a title that's earned, and it's a title that's earned through a lifetime of work and visiting and introspection and improvement and service. Service
Yes.
probably being the big one he pushes.
Yes, and that was also interesting where he was talking about his philosophy on lodge and lodge officers too. That was
He's right.
it all goes together.
And you know what, we talked about this with Brother Allred that we do here at Genoa and it's interesting now that I see that we do it, especially when I sit up there now. I get to sit in the East and I'm a part of the proceedings now as treasurer, that we do have guests. When these guests come, they are treated almost with the same respect you would give a dignitary. I mean, they're brought to the altar. They're introduced as though they themselves are important, because they are. I mean, that we're honored that you have chosen to come visit with us, and I just think it's so interesting to see that philosophy, but maybe taken on an even more personal level.
Yeah, it would be amazing to incorporate stuff like that going forward. It gives me ideas for if I ever do someday step back into line.
Yeah, when you do round 2, I'll be your senior warden. I'll run for it.
We'll see.
We'll just throw everything in upheaval. But no, I got so much to think about when it comes to this. I don't know. It just blows my mind. The more we learn on this show, you know what I mean? You think we think we have all the answers, especially when we start this out, but how much you realize while masonry is the same in a lot of ways, because we have seen that. We've seen, talking with 357, talking with Time for Fellowship, there's certain things in masonry that transcend borders. It transcends language and distance and states. I mean, I would even argue, we have that brotherhood moment when we talk to these guys via video messaging, and, it's like we're all part of the same lodge, We're just chewing the fat and shooting the shit. But there is something uniquely different about being here in the now. And
Absolutely.
So I look forward to unpacking this. I think our final episode is going to be sitting down with all three of us, if we can pull Ryan out of his new house and get you back from your training in a solid manner, and sit down and unpack this and see if we've answered the question. And then I look forward to a summer of fun, exciting topics that we kind of come up with.
Absolutely.
I've got some really good ideas. A couple of our regular listeners, I'm looking forward to having them on the show.
Good.
They've reached out and they want to be on, so I'm looking excited for that. Sitting down, also taking our new brothers, Brother Ben and Brother Clayton, and maybe sitting down with them and seeing about their experience in masonry.
Yes, we our guest who was here from Oliver H. Perry, he's going to be on as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
I think it's going to be a summer of just whatever we
want to do.
Yeah, just fun topics.
And then eventually we'll find another question.
Find another question, and we'll jump into that after summertime when things get a little bit more serious again. But
wonderful.
Well, Craftsman, once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us on the Third Degree Masonic Podcast. And if you can find it within the length of your cable toe to leave us a review on your favorite listening
service, source, streaming,
iTunes, Spotify. Leave us a review and leave us a comment. Just let us know how we're doing.
Yeah. Find us on social media.
And if you need some cool Masonic swag, check out masongearshop.com. Remember, craftsmen,
Keep your working tools in order.
and always be on the level. Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the Grand Lodge of Ohio, its officers, or any of its jurisdictions. They only reflect those of the hosts or guests.